In recent days, a new wave of protests has hit Russia. Monday launched an indefinite strike of Russian truckers who are upset over the rise in transport taxes. The thousands of truckers based out of 70 cities plan to block transit routes and highways in the coming weeks across the country. Over the last 2 months, the Russian Republic of Tatarstan also saw protests over the closure of 3 major regional banks, with the Tatar people losing their savings and holdings. A striking series of protests were seen on Sunday when tens of thousands took to the streets across the country in an estimated 80 cities ranging from Moscow and St. Petersburg to the Caucasus and across Siberia. This was the largest coordinated protest since the 2011-2012 mass protests, though they had a very different flavor and tone from the past demonstrations. In the 2011-2012 protests, they were very political in nature, primarily in response to what was being said to be rigged parliamentary elections and the announcement that Vladimir Putin would be returning for a 3rd term as president. The protests then were mostly concentrated in the 2 largest Russian cities, Moscow and St. Petersburg, and were coordinated between anti-Kremlin opposition leaders and non-Kremlin political parties such as the Communists and the Liberal Democrats. These protests also had an undercurrent of Western coordination, with the US and European diplomats meeting with protest leaders throughout the series of demonstrations. The protests Sunday, as well as the trucker and Tatar demonstrations, are very different in many ways. First, they are nationwide. Second, these protests are mostly organic. Many of the demonstrations were coordinated by opposition heavyweight Alexei Navalny, but he only campaigned in half a dozen cities, not the 80 that saw people take to the streets. That's because these protests are about something much deeper than the political reaction of 5 years ago. This is about the Russian people's dissatisfaction with the Kremlin and Vladimir Putin not holding up to its part of the bargain. The Russian people support the increasingly autocratic government as long as their way of life is stable and improving. That hasn't been the case in the past 30 years. And the Russian people are starting to call the Kremlin to task. This does not mean that a revolution is imminent in Russia. But it does mean that the Kremlin must proactively address the Russian people's concerns while juggling a very hefty series of foreign policy issues and pressures. As a group of signs in the protests stated, we don't care about Syria, we care about food.